Hey guys, here's video 1 for lesson 2 of unit 1, slave narratives. Students will be able to situate the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass in the slave narrative genre is our objective. The question I want you to ask is, what is a slave narrative? We're talking genre here. Genre is a category of literary composition characterized by similarities in form, style, or subject matter. There's other kinds of genre too. Music has different genres, right? Sometimes music genres get really specific. I like the idea of cat photos having their own genre. Cottagecore, kitties in love. Yeah, I think so. All right. IB says there are 4 main genres, and these are important. First is poetry. The second is prose nonfiction. The third is prose fiction. And then the fourth is drama. You'll need to know these. We're going to organize the year based on these 4 genres, so it's important to know. Hey, I got a question for you. What is the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass? Any idea what it is? Which genre is it in? Take a guess. Did you guess that one? Then you'd be right, geniuses. It's prose nonfiction. Prose nonfiction is a big genre, kind of an umbrella term for anything that isn't made up, right? That isn't totally imaginary. And if you look a little bit more closely, it gets pretty complicated. Here's a picture I found that does a pretty good job of organizing subgenres within genres. So you can see these different types of poetry, and then they have subgenres within the subgenres, prose fiction, drama. Here's our genre that we're looking at, prose nonfiction. And you can see it breaks it up into biographies, autobiographies, essays, articles, and humor. So when we're looking at the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, it's prose nonfiction. Which one of these would you call it? Take a guess. Did you guess autobiographies? Then you'd be right. Now, within autobiographies, there are all kinds of other subgenres. Those aren't listed in this image. But memoir would be one, and I don't know. There's got to be many others. One additional subgenre of autobiographies is the slave narrative. There's different types of slave narratives too. And so these are more subgenres. We've got the 100 slave narratives that were published between 1760 and 1865. And the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass fits in this subgenre. We also have 50 book accounts of lives of slaves written after 1865. Why is 1865 important? Civil War, end of slavery, right? And then there's also 2,500 short slave narratives that were recorded in the 1930s by the Federal Writers Project, filling 40 volumes. And I have an Aspire to do in this lesson where you can actually look at some of those because HBO made a really cool documentary of some of these stories a few years back. And you can find it pretty easily on YouTube, and I have it linked. And so you can take a look at some of these slave narratives there. But when we're talking about the narrative of life of Frederick Douglass, it's one of these 100 that were published in between 1760 and 1865. Here are some other slave narratives you may have heard of. And then, of course, the one we are reading. And like I said, there were about 100 published before 1865. A slave narrative, the definition is it's an account of the life of a fugitive or former slave written by the slave. Fugitive slave means they're on the run and legally are still owned by someone. And that was the case for Frederick Douglass when he wrote his. It's an influential tradition in American literature, shaping form and themes of some of the most famous texts. Huck Finn by Mark Twain, Black Boy by Richard Wright. The vast majority are authored by African Americans. There's also neo-slave, neo meaning new, right? Narratives that are still being written. Beloved came out in the 90s. That is maybe the most famous. There's one, though, that just came out a couple of years ago, 2017, I believe, The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. And it was turned into an Amazon Prime series. Wow, what a fantastic read that was. I just finished reading it. Highly recommend it to everybody. The question of propaganda comes up when we talk about slave narratives because they were very lucrative for the anti-slavery movement. And so the question of, how much of this is really just advertising for the anti-slavery movement is a valid question. But these slave narratives center on the narrator's rite of passage from slavery in the South to freedom in the North. Slavery is documented as a condition of extreme deprivation in slave narratives, necessitating increasingly forceful resistance. After a dangerous and suspenseful escape, the slave is free, but only after taking a new name and dedicating themselves to anti-slavery activism. So these are all common conventions of the slave genre. The pinnacle or best of the slave narratives is considered to be the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, written by himself. That's the full title. It's a long one. And it was published in 1845. What makes it so special? Well, it first of all was an international bestseller when it was first published. Douglass also spent 4 years as an abolitionist lecturer, orator, before he wrote his autobiography, so he became really good with words. He is also the first to link freedom with literacy. And that has become really important since his book. His adult quest for freedom is linked to his boyhood pursuit of literacy. And that has formed this sort of lasting ideal, African-American scholars of literature say, of the African-American hero committed to intellectual achievement. And we'll look specifically at Robert B. Steptoe, a Yale African-American scholar who talks about this in the next video. The first 5 years of its publication, it sold at least 30,000 copies, a greater number of sales than Moby Dick, Walden, Song of Myself, these classic American texts during their first years of publication. So it's an important book, but it's just one of hundreds of slave narratives. And I want to welcome you to our study of it. I hope that you will enjoy it, this very important American classic.